Hello everyone, it's Adrian Keytton here, and I'm a creative director at Blank Canvas Studios. We, an Australian-based architectural visualization studio with teams across the continent, in Sydney on the east coast and Perth on the west. Our primary focus is to create content for high-end marketing applications for residential, commercial, and infrastructure projects. And here is the showreel of our recent works. We are thrilled and honored to be a part of this presentation, and would like to say a big thanks to Pulse team for inviting us to talk about ourselves, what we do, and how we use Pulse software in our projects. Without further ado, let's get started. Scene management is one of the crucial parts of the production process. It can make things nice and smooth, or hard and painful, depending on how well it is organized. And that applies universally across the industry, no matter the size of the business, from freelancers to large production studios. We believe in teamwork, and most of our projects are created collaboratively by a few artists. And having structured and streamlined solution is really important to us. We are extensively using Xrefs to allow few people to work on one project at once, as well as layers, templates, and presets for most of the standard operations and components. Scene management can be a very complicated process, especially for large projects, and over the years we tried many different ways and solutions to make it easier. In the last iteration, before we discovered Pulse, we used a combination of scripts to set multiple cameras and submit them to Backburner for network rendering. And when we were trying to have multiple lighting scenarios within one scene, things were getting pretty complicated. Our primary goal was to find a solution which will allow us to output as many camera angles with as many lighting scenarios and various material options or styling variations from one single scene without needing to jump between different files if something needs to be adjusted. And for the network rendering, we were looking for a more functional solution which would replace default Backburner. But what was available on the market back then wasn't really sustainable for a small to mid-sized studio which doesn't have hundreds of render nodes. And these solutions were pretty complex with a really high price tag. And when Pulse Scene and Render Manager software were released, we instantly felt that it might be the right fit for our needs. And the first tests we did proved it. and very quickly we adopted them as one of our co-production tools. Let me briefly go through our common application of Pulse Scene Manager across various stages of the project, from the beginning to the final completion. And here we are at the white cards or wireframe stage. We start using Scene Manager right from the beginning of the project, where we're starting to set white card cameras. Moreover, because of the extra flexibility we have with controlling the scenes, lately we often skip in this part and start to set cameras on already textured models. As an example, here is one of the pretty standard projects we are working on at the moment. With the ability to quickly manage a lot of cameras, we are able to combine all of the apartment models in one single scene and set all the cameras in one file. When we move to the next phase, it also allows us efficiently apply materials to all apartments at once and makes it easier to make changes to materials if necessary, without needing to jump from file to make any adjustments. At this stage, Scene Manager settings are pretty basic, and we're not using any advanced setups yet, because it's just a set of wireframe cameras. For this particular project, we decided to limit number of camera per space and using 3 camera options for each of those spaces. And even though it given us 36 camera options, so that was just a decision to not overwhelm the client, but nothing can stop you to set as many cameras as you want. Another settings we're using here is simple adjustments to tone mapping. Because we're dealing with quite a few different spaces, so some apartments have open space with large windows in front, some of them more complex shaped. There are enclosed spaces like bathrooms. Few spaces have windows from both sides, so light is coming from both directions. And we adjust in settings like exposure, white balance, and couple of others to compensate that based on which side each particular space is facing, if it's facing sunny side or shadow side, or if it's enclosed and just using artificial lights, again like a bathroom spaces. Another setting here is resolution. And what we really enjoy about Scene Manager, that it automatically applies preview frame and ratio based on the settings from Scene Manager setups. And when you switch in between different setups which have different frame ratios, it automatically updates it in the preview. And that is very handy. You don't need to go to render settings every time you want to change frame ratio. And final setting here is render output. So it's pretty self-explanatory, and for this particular occasion we're not using any scene names, we're just using simple camera names because it's enough for wireframe. What leads us to the next phase, where we apply materials to the model. And again, with the ability to experiment with different camera options on the fly, we are able to output a large number of test passes to see how materials look from different angles and let client make more educated decisions on how their space or building will look with all materials applied, and explore them from different perspectives. For example, for this project, we had 6 color schemes, but that didn't stop us to explore some camera options while we were working on materials. And when we look at the total list of rendered passes, it is nearly 70 renders. And this is huge. We could do that because we were able to render multiple cameras per color scheme. And that's the power of exploration you have while working on textures and applying them to the model. And again, that can be done at various project stages. Like in this project, we were setting up cameras while working on texturing and landscaping for exterior model. What brings us to the next phase. We're able to test landscaping from different perspectives, and not just use perspective view for that, but set actual shots with different aspect ratios to see what angles might tell a better story about space or building, and quite often allowing clients to see their project from a different perspective, which they even didn't think before. As a result, we can produce much more engaging content, which will speak to the essence of the project. Plus, we can easily output quite a few vignettes as a part of the exploration process. And sometimes, clients like them so much that they include them in the final scope. And the amazing part is that this can happen even at the preparation phase, when we are just testing landscaping with basic lighting and not even meant to do the final lighting setup yet. And probably the strongest application where Scene Manager truly shines is experimenting with different lighting scenarios. Before we started using Pulse, we were moving towards templated lighting setups to gain efficiency. And meanwhile, we were getting better efficiency. After some time, it just started to feel pretty repetitive. And there was a sense that we operate more like a factory rather than a custom boutique workshop, and that we were sacrificing artistry to gain efficiency. But when we started to use Pulse Scene Manager, we realized that we can get pretty much exact efficiency without using templated lighting, and be free to play and experiment with the lighting and test different scenarios very quickly and effectively. It felt like we got the artist mojo back. And now we can create a large number of lighting conditions and test them with different camera angles at the same time. As a result, we can output an enormous amount of images to show the client any possible scenario from different angles. You just need to be careful not to overwhelm the client with tons of beautiful shots. Just kidding. Clients really love that. This scene here was set for lighting scenario exploration for one of the interiors. As you can see here, the setup is a bit more complex, but it's still very straightforward. For this project, we were setting 3 different lighting scenarios per camera, and that's the reason why we started to use scene names here, because we were using the same camera for 3 different setups, and we need to distinguish them to make sure that they will be saved correctly. Other thing which we were using here is to assign different suns per time of the day. So here we had 3 different suns for each time of the day, and you can easily choose which sun you want to use for each of the setups. Other feature we used here is layers visibility. So we were turning on and off required layers per space or time of the day if we needed to hide, for example, background, backplates, which we used as a bitmap projected to a sphere. And to control different toner mapping settings. In this instance, we used render settings override, so where you're setting up all your toner mapping and other settings as you'd like, and you fetch them for each setup. This is very powerful setting. You can fetch pretty much anything in your scene. You can fetch your toner mapping adjustments, you can fetch your render settings, so anything related to your setup for each of the lighting scenarios or cameras or any changes you would like to have between the different shots, you can easily fetch it here. And once everything is set, we are choosing render output path. In that case, we use scene name because we use the same camera for 3 different lighting setups. So in case we would use camera name, it will just get overwritten with each following lighting scenario. But if you choose scene name, it will save them all correctly. And in case if you don't want to render some of the setups, or you decided that it's not really working, or you just been experimenting with some of them and don't want them to be rendered in the final, so you can just turn off those default symbols over here. And once you are happy with everything, you can either send it to Render Manager for network rendering, or you can render it locally using batch render option over here. And when we progress into the final delivery phase, the process is pretty straightforward. We use the same file we created for light scenarios exploration, and we advanced with that. So here you can see we just refined some of the extra settings. We added some custom settings which controls only tone mapping part of our setup, for some final little refinements of different parameters, for better color correction, for some exposure control, and so on. Also, we added render element outputs where we turned off some of the unnecessary passes. We adjusted final resolution and final output. In that instance, we use Corona EXR for the final render to be able to do some final refinements after image was rendered and save all passes from there. But again, you can choose any output format you prefer. So there are the most popular file formats over here. And as you can see here, we still have all the setups we created at the light exploration stage, and we just activated the ones which were approved by the client, the cameras and time of the day per camera, and we just drag them all to the top for the better management. And you can do it pretty easily, so you can just hold your mouse over there and just rearrange it in any position you'd like. So in that case, it just makes it much clearer which passes are finals. They all sits on the top. But we kept all the other setups just in case if client will change their mind and decide to come back and change either time of the day, or they would like to change it. They would like to keep the same time of the day but change the camera. So we still having all those setups if necessary. And here we also added one more option. It's a frame. So you can assign which frame you would like to use for each of those setups. In this project, we used it for some furniture positioning. So when we moved some of the furniture pieces per shot to be able to better frame the view. But you can use it for any other purpose you'd like. And that, in a nutshell, the final setup for this scene. And from here, you can progress to network rendering, or if you'd like to render it locally, the same thing, you just use batch render. And one of the best things that all the final renders can be sent from one single file. And you won't need to create a separate file for different lighting scenarios, or different color schemes, or camera angles, and so on and so forth. And the final step to submit images to the network rendering can't be easier. So you just jump in to Render Manager, add a new job, browsing to the file you would like to submit. And here, from the settings, you choose in Scene Manager, and that gives you the list of all your Scene Manager setups. And it's already pre-selected active scenes from your file, so it's all ready to go. But if you'd like to turn some of them on or add more shots to the network rendering, you can do it from here just in a few clicks. And here you just assign in your priority. That gives you the list of requirements, so you can control what requirements you need for all the render nodes you'd like to use for this job. And once you're happy with all your settings, you just click Create and just wait for a few moments. And you get all your images submitted to the network rendering. And that's it. Now you just need to wait for computers to do their job. And the most beautiful thing, that you don't need to open 3D Max at all. You can submit all renders right through the render manager without need to open the scene. And that's super helpful, especially when you're dealing with large files or you have a lot of XREFs to be loaded. That's an amazing time saver. There are many more details that we can easily talk about for a few hours. And to wrap things up, I would like to say that Pulse is very user-friendly, so you can start using it straight away, but very powerful at the same time, and allows you to control lots and lots of parameters and settings to get any possible setup you want. In the end, I would like to thank Pulse team for creating great software, which enabled us to be more flexible, creative, and efficient at the same time. Wishing everyone all the best and stay safe. With warmest regards from Down Under, from Blank Canvas team. See you.